advised me, we have a quorum. Sound tests have been done, so we are ready to begin. I will call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 99 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Members are attending in person or using Zoom. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. And please mute while you're not speaking. Interpretation is available. You have the option to speak in the official language of your choice. If there is a disruption in translation, please get my attention by raising your hand or using the raised hand icon on your surface. I will suspend while it is being corrected. I would also like to remind members, please, when you can, speak a little slowly, so for the benefit of the translators, and keep your, in the room, keep your earpiece away from the microphone when you're not using, because it can lead to noises on the for the translators that can harm their hearing. Please direct all questions through I, the chair. Wait until I recognize you. As I said, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand, and I will recognize you. It's my understanding at the last meeting, and before that, I want to thank Ms. Gray for sitting in and chairing Monday's meeting for the committee. Thank you, Ms. Gray. And at that meeting, it's my understanding it was unanimous to resume debate on the motion that was being discussed at the conclusion of that meeting. It was a motion moved by Ms. Falk at the start of the meeting. I will first, before we move to the order, I will first give the floor to Ms. Falk to reread her motion. Then I will go to Mr. Fragas-Catos for an amendment to the motion. So we will begin with Ms. Falk. Ms. Falk?
Thank you, Chair. So just to reread the motion, it was, I move that the committee express its concern about the progress made towards the goal of a Canada without barriers by 2040, and that it report its opinion to the House.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. Then, according to your agreement, Mr. Fragas-Catos, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I do wish to amend the motion of Ms. Falk. It reads as follows: that pursuant, and I'll read it slowly for translation purposes, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee expressed its concern about the progress made towards the goal of a Canada without barriers by 2040, and undertake a study of no less than 3 meetings to review the government's progress towards meeting the goal of a barrier-free Canada by 2040, that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee request that the government table a comprehensive response to the report.
Thank you. It's my understanding the amendment has been circulated in both official languages. Discussion on the amendment of Mr. Fragas-Catos, Ms. Gray, or
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great to see you here. To look at this motion, I think that with the amendment, it was what we had heard there, and we kind of look back at what Mr. Fragas-Catos had said that day about doing a study and having 3 meetings. That was sort of the general tone. Now seeing just this morning, just before the meeting started, what the actual wording is, we were questioning Air Canada at that time, and I think that MP Falk's intention was kind of broad, because it was very short. Move the committee express its concern about the progress made towards the goal of a Canada without barriers by 2040, and so. So adding in this part about the study is very, very, very specific. The study is about reviewing the government's progress, and that's what the amendment says. So basically the way it's reading now is that it sort of has here's what the intention is, but then this is what the study does. But this study was to be a bit broader, like around Air Canada, perhaps other airlines. It was to be broader, whereas this actually says to review the government's progress. So this is very specific about the government, which could be part of this, surely, but since we had Air Canada here, that was it was a little broader. So I think that this is getting very very specific, and also just the way it is. It says government's progress, which means the wording sounds like the government is progressing as opposed to how what the status is. So I think that there's a lot put in here that wasn't really the intention for where it came from and what the original comments were that day. Also, as well, it's completely changed. Rather than just saying that we're doing a study, it says table of comprehensive response to the report, whereas MP Falk's was that it report its opinion to the House. So that completely changes what the intent of that was as well. So it didn't keep that part in. So it is changing it quite substantially. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Fragas-Caddis and then Madame Chabot on the amendment.
Mr. Chair, you don't need to hear this from me. You're a very able and respected chair, but if it was changing the motion of Ms. Falk very substantially, it would be out of order, and clearly it's not out of order. So there is that. But more to the point, I'm quite surprised with the response that we've heard from our colleague. Here we heard from the head of Air Canada the other day in testimony that I think affected all of us. We have many constituents who have had experiences and challenges. I read into testimony myself the challenges of one particular constituent, Ms. Zarillo, who brought the initial idea forward to summon Air Canada, did basically the same. And I see nothing wrong with us looking at, in a study, in 3 meetings no less, examining these matters. And yes, looking at what the government has done. And the opposition, I expect, would be very willing to critique the government's progress. Let's examine that. Has the government done a good job on this file? What improvements need to be made? Unless, and this is what I could take from Ms. Gray's comments, that the government has made such substantial progress that they don't want to examine that they're somehow afraid of looking at that in greater detail, which, that's interesting, and the Conservatives are apparently on record as saying that this morning. Unless they wish to turn course here, and we can do that, I think this is a very reasonable amendment. We can delve into the details and look at that on behalf of Canadians.
Thank you. The amendment is in order. We now have Madame Chabot, Ms. Falk, and then Ms. Ferrari, and then Ms. Gray. Madame Chabot, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. When I received the amendment to the proposal from Ms. Falk, I kind of twitched. I sat up and took notice, but I twitched when it came to these same terms that have just been mentioned, to examine the progress of the government. I don't think that was the intention of the original motion. The start of your amendment is fine. So, pursuant and so on, the committee expresses its concerns concerning the progress made. We had concerns about that. So that was the point of the motion. Now, 3 meetings, I think that's too many. So I have a sub-amendment to present, Chair. So a study of at least 2 meetings, I think that's sufficient. And I would delete from the amendment the part that says to examine the progress made by the government towards. And replace towards with on. So 2 meetings, and delete the part that says to examine the progress of the government towards. So 2 meetings on the achievement of the objective Canada without barriers. So I would make it more neutral in my proposal. So we can express our concerns in a study with at least 2 meetings on achieving the objective of Canada without barriers. That's my sub-amendment.
Thank you, Madame Chabot. So we are now on the sub-amendment of Ms. Chabot and Ms. Falk. No? Ms. Ferrari was the next indicate? Okay, then Ms. Gray? Okay. Any discussion then on the sub-amendment? Mr. Fragascatos?
I think it's a reasonable sub-amendment, and I think we should go to a vote.
Seeing no further, Ms. Gray, on the sub-amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to be clear that in my comments, I wasn't saying that we shouldn't do a study. I was just clarifying the type of study that we should be doing. I just wanted to clarify that after Mr. Fragascatos' comments from earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Seeing no further discussion, I will call for a recorded vote on the sub-amendment of Madame Chabot. Everybody clear on the sub-amendment? Seeing so, Madam Clerk, please call the recorded vote on the sub-amendment.
Mr. Fragascatos?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. Falk?
Yes.
Ms. Ferrari?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Ms. Zarillo?
Yes.
Yeas pour 11-11, nays contre 0 aucun.
Sub-amendment carried unanimously. We will now deal with the amendment as amended, correct?
Yes.
Ms. Gray, on the amendment as amended.
As amended. The motion as amended.
Sorry, no, the amendment.
The amendment as amended.
We didn't get to the motion yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move a sub-amendment, and this is being circulated now. That after the words "a Canada without barriers by 2040," I would like to move that we add, and given the testimony heard by the committee on February 5th, 2024, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee hold no less than, we have 3 meetings here, to study the progress, it would be 2 now, less than 2 meetings, to study the progress towards a barrier-free Canada, that the committee invite the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities, Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer, the Auditor General of Canada, Canada's Accessibility Commissioner, disability advocates, and federally regulated industry representatives. And then that would be the end of the sub-amendment. Just to be clear, it would then be followed by, and that the committee report its findings to the House, which was already in the original amendment. And the intention of this is just to clarify that this would be a wholesome study. We did hear testimony during the last meeting where the Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer actually had a serious incident with Air Canada. We know that the Auditor General of Canada had done an audit actually on persons with disabilities in transportation, and we have not had the Auditor General here yet on this. She had actually written this committee saying that she would come to committee, so this would be the perfect time actually to put this together because of this particular study that we're doing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just so clear, so it is two meetings, because the committee already made
Because the committee
decision on
just amended it
Okay.
to 2, yes.
that. Okay. I'm going to ask Mr. Long, I'm going to get the clerk to read the amendment, the sub-amendment of Ms. Gray, so we're clear. Then I'll go to Mr. Long. No, I'll read the sub-amendment, please.
So that pursuant to Standing Order... Okay. So, that pursuant to Standing Order 108.2, the committee expressed its concern about the progress made towards the goal of a Canada without barriers by 2040 and undertake a study of no less than 2 meetings to study the progress towards the goal of a barrier-free Canada by 2040, that the committee invite the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities, the Auditor General of Canada, Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer, Canada's Accessibility Commissioner, disability advocates, and federally regulated industry representatives, that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to the report.
Thank you. I had Mr. Longden. Ms. Falk, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, and I thought you had acknowledged me.
Oh, yeah, okay, and I did. So Ms. Falk and then Mr. Long. And now we're on the sub-amendment of Ms. Gray.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think at the last meeting when Ms. MP Fragiskatis brought up turning it into a study, a 3-meeting study at the last meeting, thought that was a great idea, especially because we only had Air Canada that was at our meeting. I know, and I'm sure everybody around this table knows, that there are also other airlines that have treated people with disabilities horribly, and it is not just Air Canada. I think that this is a great opportunity brought forward by MP Fragiskatis to be able to look at this a little bit more wholesome and make a study out of it and report to the House. So I think absolutely this is in line. I don't, as MP Gray had mentioned, we haven't had the AG here yet, who specifically had done a report and wrote to us asking us to come here. I think that this is great, and I think just expanding it, not even taking the study, giving the opportunity for the people that can speak, that have the authority to speak for these items, is imperative to come here.
Ms. Falk, Mr. Long on the sub-amendment.
The list that MP Gray has submitted for the study is quite a list. I mean, we're talking 2 meetings here, right? And I just want to make the point, too, that the minister was just here. And I don't believe there was any questions even asked of the minister. I just want to make the point. The minister was here, and I don't believe there was any questions even asked. So, I guess we'd be okay with it. I just want to make that point that, again, we're saying no less than 2 meetings, but that list alone, how many people are on that list? 3? That's it? Yeah, can we take a look at that?
It cannot be circulated because it's only in English. You have the verbal list. I will ask the clerk to identify who the sub-amendment wants to invite. Madam Clerk, just if you could.
Sorry?
In both languages?
I have it in English only.
The clerk only has it in English. She only has it in English, so we cannot circulate it. I would ask her to just confirm to the committee who the sub-amendment wants to invite. Madam Clerk? Then we'll go to Ms. Falk.
So the Minister of Diversity, Inclusions and Persons with Disability, the Auditor General of Canada, Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer, Canada's Accessibility Commissioner, disability advocates, and federally regulated industry representatives.
Ms. Falk?
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to point out that to MP Long, through you, Chair, obviously, When we brought the motion forward for the ministers to come, we requested each minister for an hour and their department for an hour. And it was the Liberals that decided to mush all the ministers together to give less time for questions and accountability. This sub-amendment was based off MP Fragaskatis' idea of having 3 meetings. So that's why there are these people. So we can absolutely amend it to 3 meetings. I think this is an imperative issue, and all Canadians, it doesn't matter disability, non-disability, should be and must be treated with dignity and respect. And so I think this committee can absolutely offer that time to make sure that that is something that we're continuing to achieve.
Mr. Fragaskatos, on the sub-amendment.
I think we've reached a reasonable place, Mr. Chair. I look forward to the testimony, so I think we should go ahead and vote.
Seeing no further discussion on the sub-amendment of Ms. Gray. Ms. Gray, on your sub-amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be clear that the sub-amendment that was circulated did have 3 meetings, but we had just previously agreed to 2. So that's where, that's why.
It's in order.
Yeah, it's all in order. So I just want to be clear that I wasn't saying it was just we had all agreed as a committee to 2, although my original sub-amendment, which was circulated to everyone, actually said 3. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'm going to ask the clerk to call a recorded vote on the sub-amendment of Ms. Gray. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Fragaskatos?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. Falk?
Yes.
Ms. Ferrari?
Yes.
Ms. Roberts?
Yes.
Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Ms. Zerillo?
Yes.
The sub-amendment of Ms. Gray is carried unanimously. Seeing no further discussion, we'll go to the main motion as amended. Everybody's clear on the main motion?
No. Sir, we're going to Mr. Fragaskatos' amendment.
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. So we're now to vote. We're now going to. Thank you. Madame Chabot, do you have your hand up?
Je suis prête à voter, Monsieur le Président, mais
I'm ready to vote, but I would like the new motion with all these sub-amendments to be circulated to us as soon as possible so that this is quite clear. But we can vote in the meantime, Chair.
Thank you, Madame Chabot. It is being translated, will be circulated shortly, but it is in order. It was verbalized. And seeing that, I call a recorded vote on the amendment of Mr. Fragaskato as amended.
Mr. Chair, can we just read out exactly what we're voting for, just so that all members are clear?
Good idea. Thank you. I was going to go there too. Madam Clerk, do you have the, if you would verbalize slowly, the amendment of Mr. Fragaskatos as amended?
Do you need a minute? We can take a second here. Do you need?
You do have it? No, she has it. No, she has. No.
So,
Okay, committee members, your attention. The clerk will read the amendment of Mr. Fragaskatos as amended.
that pursuant to Standing Order 108.2, the committee expressed its concern about the progress made towards the goal of a Canada without barriers by 2040 and undertake a study of no less than 2 meetings to study the progress towards the goal of a barrier-free Canada by 2040, that the committee invite the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities, the Auditor General of Canada, Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer, Canada's Accessibility Commissioner, disability advocates, and federally regulated industry representatives, that the committee report its finding and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to the report.
Thank you. Seeing that, Madam Clerk, call Ms. Gray.
you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to see, would it come up next? We seem to have lost that, and that it report its opinion to the House.
That will be in
That'll be in the next.
That will be in the motion as
amended?
when we get to it.
I just want to be clear.
Are we correct? Yep. Yep.
It'll be in the next.
Yeah.
It'll be in the next vote? It's in my motion. Okay. Report its findings to the House, or report its opinions to the House. That it report its opinion to the House, which is a little different. We're doing a study, but also we want to report our opinion to the House.
With that, committee members, I'm going to suspend for a moment while we're clarifying.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Suspend for 2 minutes.
So that.
Read in totality the amendment as amended before we go to vote. Madame Shabat. Assistez-toi.
Please participate.
Sit down. Assistez-toi. Sit down. Assistez-toi. To sit down. If I tell her in French to sit down. Assise. Assise-toi. Bon. Assise-toi. Bon. Madam Clerk, if you would read the amendment as amended.
That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee expressed its concern about the progress made towards the goal of a Canada without barriers by 2040 and undertake a study of no less than 2 meetings to study the progress towards the goal of a barrier-free Canada by 2040, that the committee invite the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities, the Auditor General of Canada, Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer, Canada's Accessibility Commissioner, disability advocates, and federally regulated industry representatives, that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to the report.
Is it a point of order? Because we are in the process of voting. I called the vote.
point of order, but I have a question. I'd like to make an amendment.
Committee members, I specifically asked the clerk to read the amendment and that we were proceeding directly to a vote. Based on that, I'm going to proceed to a vote because we will then go to the main motion, which can be addressed at that time. So, no, I'm going directly to the vote on the amendment to the amendment as articulated by the clerk. Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Mr. Fragiscaros?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. Falk?
Yes.
Ms. Ferrari?
Yes.
Ms. Roberts?
Yes.
Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Ms. Zorillo?
Yes.
11 yeas pour, 0 aucun nays contre.
The amendment as amended has been carried unanimously. Before we go to the main motion, I will go to Mr. Coteau if you have an item to raise on the motion as now amended.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. In the motion, it predetermines the study by saying the committee expresses its concern with the actual legislation that we're actually asking to study. So I would actually like to make an amendment, and I think this is about fairness. If we're doing a study, I think it's only fair for us to keep an open mind, to bring in experts, to listen to the Auditor General, the Minister, to witnesses, and then make a statement about our concerns or any other items we want to add to that study. So I'd like to make an amendment to remove that section that says in the first sentence to express our concerns and just maybe leave it saying something like to examine. The committee will study. Yeah, I think it's fair and it's practical.
Thank you, Mr. Coteau. I do agree it is prejudging, and committee members have the right to speak their own mind, but I will leave it to the committee to make a decision. You made that as an amendment, Mr. Coteau? Did you make an amendment?
Yeah, so just to remove, express our concerns and to study. I think that's what we're trying to do here. We'll study.
I believe I have Ms. Gray and Madame Chabot and Ms. Ferrari, and we're dealing with the amendment the amendment to the motion, because we adopted the first amendment to the main motion.
I think we need a little suspension because the way it is worded, not sure it fits.
Ms. Gray, and then Ms. Ferrari, and then I'm going to suspend. Or was it Madame Chabot? Whoever had their hand up, please put their hand up again. Okay. Yeah. We're speaking to the amendment of Mr. Coteau. Ms. Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't see how we could not have that we express concern considering the testimony that we had from Air Canada and considering the horrific situations that persons with disabilities have experienced with transportation and with airlines. So I don't see how we could possibly take out that we're concerned about this. That's the whole premise of even doing this study, of even making the comments. So I just think it's unbelievable that he would want to remove that, considering what we know.
Madame Roberts, and then Madame Chabot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just have a few things I want to clear up. I am part of the AODA. I'm also part of the Accessibility Committee in my community, and I'm proud to say that in our municipality of King Township, we received 100% on our last inspection by the province. Here's my point. My point is that we keep at the federal level pushing it forward, and we're doing nothing. This is important because the individuals with disabilities deserve the right to live like the rest of us live, barrier-free. And I think that if we don't take this seriously, if we don't do the study, if we don't bring motions forward to help people with disabilities, what are we really doing here?
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Madame Chabot, on the amendment proposed by Mr. Coteau.
Je vais être en désaccord avec.
I disagree with this amendment for two reasons. First of all, I think the spirit of the study is for us to express our concerns. We've just voted twice. One was an amendment from a Liberal colleague that clearly said that that was his wording. The committee expresses its concerns. That's how it was drafted. And then we adopted a sub-amendment to correct that, but we never changed that. So at this stage here, it's probably not out of order, but I don't think it's consistent with what we've just voted on. And I think that's what we want to express, after all, our concerns. If we weren't concerned, if everything was going well, then I don't think we would be doing this study.
Thank you, Madame Chabot. Ms. Ferrari?
Just to add on to this, I think what's actually kind of remarkable is that every party, every member from every party was united when we had this witness forward, the CEO of Air Canada. These are not allegations, these are not opinions, these are facts printed in newspapers, these are ongoing lawsuits. People, you know, their own Liberal member from Milton told the horrific story of his constituent. You know, there was great news coverage from this committee about all of us taking this CEO to task, and so he should have been. It was absurd to hear what was said. So I think saying that these are opinions or it doesn't make any sense. These are facts of people being abused and mistreated by Air Canada. That's the facts. And so I don't support Mr. Coteau's amendment.
Mr. Coteau?
Yeah, thank you for the comments. I think, well, just to address a couple of them, yes, we did agree with the original amendments, the changes to the original motion, but at any given moment, we as a committee can revisit any type of amendment that's or motion that's on the floor to make improvements. So my suggestion was to make an improvement, and I'll tell you why. I agree with the fact that Air Canada, the criticism that was applied to Air Canada, I agree with the criticism. There's no question. And there's a lot of criticism that's out there. MP Roberts said that there was good progress provincially. I'm sure there's also good progress federally across the country. What we're doing is we're taking one incident that we've taken a witness on, this Air Canada issue, and you're applying it towards the entire progress of the legislation. So my suggestion is to keep an open mind. Let's bring in witnesses. And you can put in the actual legislation that we have concerns about what happened with Air Canada or name anyone else. But to take the entire legislation and all of the initiatives that have taken place over the last few years and to put them into one category as expressing concern, I think is not fair when you're actually studying the actual progress. It doesn't make sense. It's a contradiction. So I'm not going to die on this hill, but I think if we're going to be fair, if we're going to have an open mind, we bring in witnesses, we listen, and then we make a determination at the end. You cannot predetermine a study on the progress and then go ahead and study the progress. It doesn't make sense. Express concerns for what we've heard, not for the entirety of the legislation and the entire piece of the initiatives as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coteau. Before we move on to further debate on this, I have to advise the committee that, and you, Mr. Coteau, the amendment as was worded is not admissible. It's inconsistent with the language of the main amendment that was already voted on. So the amendment with your wording is not admissible. So I will go to the vote on the main motion of Ms. Gray as amended.
Point of order. Can you explain why?
The clerk.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because when you read, you want to delete express its concern, and you change it to studied, and it goes like this: the committee to study about the progress made towards.
Say that one more time.
The committee to study about the progress. The committee to study about the progress.
So that
made
the committee
towards-
study the progress.
The committee study the progress.
Is that fine?
But then you change it. I can only deal with the amendment that you put forward.
Well, come on. We know what the spirit of what I was saying, that the committee study the progress. Like, it's because of a one adjective, or?
Mr. Coteau, we cannot change what was adopted, and Mr. Fragascato's amendment was adopted. And the advice I'm getting from the
Fine.
clerk is the minor wording change that you are moving is inconsistent, and I have to rule it is inadmissible. So seeing no, the only debate I'll entertain is on, no, I'm not entertaining any because I moved to a vote. Madam Clerk, we're calling the vote on the main motion as amended. Comprenez-vous?
You understand?
Mr. Fragiscatos?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes?
Mrs. Falk?
Yes.
Ms. Ferrari?
Yes.
Ms. Roberts?
Yes.
Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Ms. Zarillo?
Yes.
Yeas pour 11-11, nays contre 0 aucun.
Merci beaucoup. Motion
Thank you very much.
adopted as amended. We will now move to the order of the committee study. I would like to welcome bienvenue Madame Laroche. Madame Laroche is appearing
Welcome, Madame Laroche.
on Bill C-319. Madame Laroche, you would have an opening statement. Oui? Pour 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes.
A point of order.
Point of order. If we have 2 rounds of witnesses, correct? And we're going to 10:15. Do we have a hard stop at 10:15?
Yes, because we started on time.
Yep. So does that mean we're not listening to the second round based on the timeline now?
We will start the second round of witnesses at roughly the same time as on the schedule.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Roughly.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. So just to be clear with Ms. LaRoche, so then we only have 15 minutes with Ms. LaRoche.
Does the committee want to alter that?
So perhaps we could invite Ms. LaRoche back at another time so that she would get the full amount of her time.
I'm at the direction of the committee by
Either that or perhaps the witnesses that we had scheduled in the second hour get invited back at another time, whatever might work best for everyone, just so that we don't cut into their time.
Mr. Long? I
Chair.
mean, it was the committee
I know.
that
Yeah, I agree.
created the discussion that led us to where we're at.
I would suggest we give MP LaRoche her 15 minutes, but invite her back for some more time. We already have witnesses scheduled, at 9:15, so let's continue with the witnesses. Apologies to MP LaRoche, but let's find some time to invite her back after this. Thank you.
While we have committee business. Okay, what I'm going to suggest is that we would proceed with that, and we would invite Madame LaRouche back for the hour slot that we have set up for committee business for next week. Yes. Would that be okay? Because we are doing subcommittee. Do I see a consensus on that? Okay. So then we will open Madame LaRouche, Madame Chabot, before we do.
Ben, je tiens à exprimer que oui.
I'd like to say that there is consensus. We have to reinvite the sponsor of the bill for the full hour as planned. But I'd like to express the fact that I'm very sorry that this is how we're having to start this particular study. But I do agree with this idea that we'd invite back Madame LaRouche, and we do express our apologies to you today.
Yeah, Madame Chabot.
Thank you very much, Madame Chabot.
My understanding is a consensus in the committee that we would invite Madame LaRouche back for 1 hour at the first appropriate meeting, which I'm going to say is for the hour slot that we had identified for committee business for next Thursday, next Thursday's meeting. Bon? Madame? Bon? So at this time, we will still, Madame LaRouche will allow you with an opening statement. You have the floor. Vous la parole.
You have the floor. So, Chair, I'll make my opening remarks and then I'll come back on another occasion. Okay, let's go. So, hello, everyone. Dear members of the committee, thank you very much for still inviting me today so that together we can have a close look at Bill C-319. It's quite a simple piece of legislation, but it's vital, and it's designed to improve the financial situation of seniors in a severely deteriorated economic climate. At the heart of this bill, there's a two-pronged approach to meet the needs of seniors. Firstly, the bill aims to eliminate the age discrimination that currently exists within our system by amending the Old Age Security Act. This bill proposes to increase the amount of the full pension by 10% for all pensioners aged 65 and over. This will allow us to correct a flagrant injustice because since 2022, only seniors aged 75 and over have benefited from this 10% increase, leaving a large proportion of this population in a precarious financial situation. What's more, the bill increases the exemption granted for a person's income when calculating the guaranteed income supplement, going from $5,000 to $6,500 per year. This means that each beneficiary aged 65 and over will have an extra $1,500 in his or her pocket every year, representing significant financial support in an environment where prices are rising exponentially. It's crucial to recognise the urgency of this issue because over 7.25 million Canadian seniors and 1.8 million Quebec seniors benefit from the Old Age Security Programme, with over 3.7 million Canadians between the ages of 65 and 74. An increase in the OAS programme is imperative. Assistance that only reaches those aged 75 or over includes 2.8 million people, so it misses the mark by helping a minority of seniors while abandoning a majority. We must act to support our seniors who have made a significant contribution to our society. The facts speak for themselves. We see that the elderly spend a disproportionate share of their income on housing and food. These are areas of expenditure that are experiencing particularly severe price increases. What's more, an alarming number of elderly people find themselves in situations where their housing represents an excessive proportion of their income, making their day-to-day lives even more difficult. It's also important to note that poverty among the elderly is a worrying reality. In 2020, 13% of seniors were living in poverty. This is a higher rate than for any other age group. It's our responsibility to ensure that our seniors can live with dignity after devoting their lives to the well-being of our society. Finally, it's crucial to consider the financial cost of this bill. While the proposed increase in benefits represents a significant investment, estimated at $16 billion over several years, we must see it as an investment in our society and in the dignity of seniors. So I'd like to say, as I move towards my conclusion, that Bill C-319 represents a crucial opportunity to correct injustices and support seniors in a difficult economic context. We cannot turn our backs on those who have given so much to our society. By approving this bill, we are sending a strong message that we value seniors and are committed to ensuring their well-being in the years to come. And Chair, this is a struggle and a debate that I have been working on before I entered political life. I'd already seen the distress of seniors when I was an assistant from 2007 to 2011. I saw that people who came to the office with the most financial distress were seniors. And then I worked in community groups where we talked about abuse of seniors and poverty. But the message today that we're sending with this bill is that we want to help seniors who are in the most difficulty, but we don't want to just concentrate on a misery scenario. Seniors, as far as possible, want to be able to contribute to another reality that we're observing, namely a labour shortage. Certain seniors have said, yes, we would like to contribute, we'd like to remain on the labour market, but we're being penalised. That is why my bill has these two essential aspects. First of all, to allow seniors who want to work to be able to do this, and for others, we want to give them a helping hand and give them a boost with the OAS. Thank you very much, Chair.
Merci, Madame La.
Thank you, Madame Laroche.
Disservice to Madame LaRouche on this important topic to begin for a few minutes. So what I'm going to do is suspend. The committee made a decision to invite Madame LaRouche back for the full 1 hour of question and answer at the meeting I identified. So we will suspend so that we can start on time with the witness portion of this committee meeting. So with that, merci, Madame LaRouche, and we'll suspend while the witnesses are being brought in, and we'll start the second hour at 9:15. Suspend. committee is back in session. I would like to welcome the following witnesses for the study of Bill C-319 from the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, James Gennaro. Policy and Government Relations, Brayso, FADOQ, Giselle Tassé Goodman, President, Provincial Secretariat, Philippe Poirier-Monette, Special Advisor, Government Relations. As an individual appearing virtually, we have Arthur Sweetman, Professor, McMaster University. We'll begin with a 5-minute opening statement from Mr. Gennaro. Gennaro?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak this morning. As part of your study into this very important bill, I'm James Gennaro, and I'm with the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. We are a pan-Canadian organization focused on caregivers, which is to say parents, siblings, friends, neighbors, and the like, as well as care providers, such as personal support workers and direct support professionals who support people with disabilities all across our country. Our goal is to make Canada the best place in the world to give and receive care. The intent of Bill C-319 is to raise the pension incomes of retired Canadians. This is both timely and urgently necessary, in our opinion. The National Institute on Aging recently released their 2023 Aging in Canada survey results. This survey of Canadians 50 and over has helped illuminate what caregivers across the country already know, that seniors are feeling the financial pinch resulting from the ongoing cost of living crisis. An overwhelming 70% of survey respondents reported that they are concerned with the rising cost of living, and nearly 50% worry about running out of money. Sadly, over 1/3 reported worrying about a reduction in pension or other government benefits. This problem of pinched household budgets due to the cost of living crisis becomes even more urgent when the low-income senior is also a caregiver. 1 in 4 Canadians is a caregiver today, and 1/2 of us will be a caregiver at some point in our lives. Women today in Canada are just as likely as not to be a caregiver already today in 2024. For many of these caregivers, financial distress is at the top of their very long list of struggles. Mercilessly increasing grocery and other bills have made an already difficult situation much, much worse. Recent data shows that nearly 2/3 of caregivers reported financial hardship last year due to their care responsibilities. A recent survey conducted by us at the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence found that over 2/3 of people receiving care in Canada are themselves seniors. In addition, approximately 20% of caregivers are also seniors. Of these, 80% of senior caregivers care for other seniors, such as wives, adult children, husbands, or even their parents. For these seniors, struggling through the already threadbare social safety net designed to help them is part of their daily reality. Statistically, senior caregivers are mostly women, and they have likely had to take time off work at some point in their lives to have children or to care for somebody else. This means they lost out on years of CPP contributions, which continues to punish them for caring for others through lower CPP payments well into their senior years. Imagine worrying about how to pay the rent or feed your ailing wife while also bathing her and coping with cognitive decline. Unfortunately, this is the daily reality of nearly 1/3 of caregivers in their older years who reported some kind of economic strain due to their care responsibilities. Seniors are crying out for solutions. We have spent the last year advocating for the Canada Caregiving Credit to be converted into a refundable tax credit. While out of scope for this study, it would certainly help, as would the provisions in this bill, which would go a long way towards solving the cost of living crisis for seniors. We strongly endorse this bill. Seniors helped build Canada and are often called upon to look after others during what really should be their years of rest and relaxation. The least we can do is adjust our very successful national programs, like the Canada Pension Plan, to meet the challenges of the current crisis and make their lives even just a little bit easier. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gennaro. Madame Tassé Goodman pour 5 minutes.
5 minutes, Ms. Goodman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, MPs, my name is Gisèle Tassi-Goodman, President of the Réseau FADOC, and with me is Philippe Poirier-Monet, who is Special Advisor in Government Relations. First of all, I'd like to thank the members of the committee for this invitation to comment on Bill C-319. The Réseau FADOC is a group of people aged 50 and over with over 550,000 members. In each of our political representations, we want to contribute to improving the quality of life of seniors. From the outset, I must emphasise that Bill C-319 touches on a subject of great concern to seniors. Hardly a day goes by without our members asking us about the old age security pension or the guaranteed income supplement. So we are their voice here in this committee today. In July 2022, the old age security pension was permanently increased by 10% for people aged 75 or over. Increasing this benefit was and continues to be a necessary move. However, people aged 65 to 74 do not understand why they are excluded from this increase. Currently, a person under 75 receiving only the old age security pension and the guaranteed income supplement will have an annual income of $21,345. A senior in this situation has an income below the official Canadian poverty line, which is based on the market basket measure. We have to remember that this index establishes the cost of a basket based on minimum subsistence consumption. This index includes in particular dental care, eye care, and the purchase of medication, all of which are essential expenses for seniors. Bill C-319 proposes to increase the full pension by 10% for people aged 65 to 74. Réseau FADOC supports this proposal because financial distress is ageless. With this change, all people aged 65 and over will have access to the same amount of full pension without any discrimination based on their age. The other measure proposed by Bill C-319 is to increase the work exemption or work earnings exemption for recipients of the guaranteed income supplement. Currently, it is possible for these individuals to earn up to $5,000 in work income while receiving the full amount of the guaranteed income supplement. For earnings between $5,000 and $15,000, there's a partial exemption that applies. In recent years, the Canadian government has increased this earnings exemption on a number of occasions, and on each occasion, the Réseau FADOC has welcomed these decisions. This measure reduces the effects of a tax trap that discourages recipients of the guaranteed income supplement from remaining in the workforce. Moreover, in a context of labour shortages, this measure would be well received. We have to recall that during the last election campaign, the Canadian government pledged to introduce a tax credit for experienced workers. Since this tax credit has not yet been deployed, improving the guaranteed income supplement earnings exemption would be a step in the right direction. To conclude, we feel compelled to address two issues that are not dealt with in Bill C-319. During the 2021 election campaign, the federal government pledged to increase the guaranteed income supplement. 3 years later, seniors are still waiting. The Réseau FADOC encourages the Government of Canada to live up to its commitment. Finally, we must also address shortcomings in terms of the old age security indexation method. This program is indexed on the basis of the Consumer Price Index, where salaries are moving at a faster rate of around 1 percentage point. So as a result, federal benefits will play an increasingly reduced role in the retirement income replacement rate in the future. Our organisation is calling on the government to revise the method of indexing the OAS programme to take wage growth into account. I'd like to thank the members of the committee for having listened to us, and we are now ready to answer your questions. Mr. Monet will answer your questions, and I reserve myself the right to also intervene. Thank you very much. Madame Tassi-Goodman.
And for 5 minutes, please. You have the floor. Are you hearing me?
Oh, sorry. I was listening to the translation and didn't hear you speak. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. As background, I'd like to start by considering low income in Canada. Using the market-based measure, in 2019, 10.3% of persons in Canada fell below the low income threshold. Those under 18, at 9.4%, were somewhat less likely to be low income than the average. Those between 18 and 64 had an above average low income rate of 11.8%. Of relevance today, those aged 65 and over, at 5.7%, had the lowest likelihood of being in low income among these three age groups. While there are individuals over age 65 who have low income, Canadian programs have been very successful in reducing low income rates for this age group to below that of society as a whole. Turning to Bill C-319, as I understand it, two changes are proposed. I'll focus on them in turn. The first will increase what I call the earnings disregards for the Guaranteed Income Supplement, or the GIS. Since 2020, the two disregards have been $5,000 each. Current GIS recipients face a three-stage regime. In Stage 1, the first $5,000 in annual earnings has no effect on their GIS benefits. In Stage 2, the next $10,000 in earnings are taxed at 50% for a maximum and second $5,000 disregard. In Stage 3, earnings beyond $15,000 are taxed at 100% to the full amount of the GIS. The bill proposes to increase both the Stage 1 and Stage 2 disregards to $6,500, while retaining the Stage 2 tax rate of 50%. This implies that GIS recipients would be able to earn up to $6,500 per year without their GIS amount being affected, and that they would then face a 50% tax rate on earnings between $6,500 and $19,500. Beyond $19,500, they would face a 100% tax rate. Of course, the eligibility threshold for GIS is not much above $19,500 for a single individual. I see two obvious motivations for this proposed change. The first would be to provide additional income to low-income seniors who are already earning more than $5,000 per year. The second would be to incentivize low-income seniors to increase their labor supply. However, among low-income seniors, those with the lowest pre-retirement incomes are least likely to work post-age 65. So those with more disadvantaged backgrounds are least likely to benefit from this change. Also, previous changes to the GIS appear to have had modest impacts on changing labor supply among GIS recipients. I suspect that this proposal would similarly have a positive but very modest impact on earnings. Overall, while the potential policy change will probably not have much impact on extreme poverty, it will benefit those who are low income and who already earn more than $5,000 per year. I therefore see this as worthwhile since it will help some low-income working seniors. It rewards work and hopefully incentivizes it. Turning to the second part of the bill, it proposes to increase OAS payments to those between age 65 and 74 by 10%. Over 95% of individuals in this age category receive at least some OAS income. So this part of the policy change is not exclusively targeted at low-income seniors. Compared to the first part of the bill, this is a much more expensive proposal for taxpayers. My best guess, derived from calculations based on an Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions report, is that this policy change would cost between 0.15 and 0.2% of GDP. This is a very rough guess, and it's also a very big number. Further, in terms of labor market incentives, although any effect is likely to be small, I expect it to decrease rather than increase labor supply and earnings. A greater concern is that it's not obvious that the federal government currently has sufficient fiscal capacity to undertake an expenditure such as this while simultaneously building, for example, a robust pharmacare program. I think that the opportunity cost of the funds for this second policy change need to be considered very carefully. Undoubtedly, Canadians' views will differ, but I think that many, including many seniors, would find greater dignity in and prefer alternatives such as spending money on improved health care, rather than this non-targeted increase to OAS payments. If, additionally, we're worried about seniors living with dignity and avoiding low income, or more broadly than low income, avoiding poverty, then a targeted proposal would be preferable to this broad brush approach. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetman. We'll now begin the first round of questioning with Ms. Roberts. Ms. Roberts for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a couple of questions. I'd like to start with James. So first of all, welcome, James. It's great to see you again, and thank you for being here today and your great work. I really enjoyed attending the conference on November the 8th. So here's my issue, and as you know, I volunteer in a seniors home. So I've been participating with seniors for many, many years. And I see a lot of issues even in my own community where I think I'll address one specific situation where I have a senior that lives in a modest townhouse of 1,200 square feet, raised her 4 children, and decided at the age of 50 plus that she was going to go back to work. As she joined the workforce, her husband retired a few years before she did, but unfortunately, he came down with stage 4 cancer. So she had to obviously leave her job to take care of him. He passed away within 2 years, and she now loses 40% of his CPP, widow's pension. And her CPP contributions weren't that great because obviously she chose to raise her family, and that was a personal decision. So she decides to go back to work. She goes back to work, and 3 weeks after she gets a job, now she's, here she is in her late 60s, COVID hit. So last in, first out. So now she's struggling to maintain her home because she doesn't have the income to support it. She manages through the process by renting out one of her rooms to the students that attends university, and guess what? He loses his job, so now he can't pay the rent. She feels bad, she can't toss him out. But she still has bills to pay. COVID's over, gets back to work, and she still maintains the home. So I agree with one of the things that we're looking at about increasing the GIS, because for her to go back to work kind of offsets her GIS payments, so she's no further ahead. So I guess what I would ask you is, you care about seniors, and thank God, because I'm on my way there. What would you suggest, and what have you heard about providing support to seniors, taking care of seniors?
Thank you very much for the question, Ms. Roberts, and thank you for coming to our conference back in November as well. And I'm sorry to hear about your constituent. Stories like that are all too common across the country. We hear them every day, as I'm sure you all do as well, from your constituents. And I'd say a few things to that. There's a role for the state in this to increase her retirement income, which I think we can all agree is the intent of the bill. So the work on GIS to increase that amount is very, very good. When it comes to earnings exemptions, there's some thought, really, that any sort of clawback of earnings is punishing people for working. You could argue, and I would argue quite strongly, that CPP is our natural endowment as Canadians. We work hard, we pay into it. What we receive out of it is our entitlement as Canadians, because we've all paid into it collectively to support ourselves and our families and our seniors as we age. There is very good work to be done around probably addressing these earnings exemptions towards zero over time, so that seniors can work. If they have to work, they're not punished for working. But ultimately, these things take time. Even the conversation we're having today is illuminating the fact that far too many seniors are put in a position where they have to go back to work. It's one thing if they choose to go back to work, but if they have to go back to work, over time, this should be addressed. But today, this is, in my opinion, in our opinion, a start to paving that way to not punishing, in this case, seniors for earning more income. The last thing I'll say, if it's all right, is that there's a broader role out there as well, right? So that senior in your community would probably benefit from a more holistic local social safety net that's able to help her afford groceries a bit more, pay her property tax bill, pay her income tax every year, and do all the other things. So it's not just about income, it's also about the things that take part of that income over time. We can all do better in that regard.
So I just want to reiterate one thing, and this particular senior who goes to work to stay in her home also receives, so we have a food bank in Toronto, Sidam Food Bank, who delivers 3.17 million meals per month. Mm-hmm. And they deliver to 3,000 senior homes. And I'm going to tell you something. She has to be very cautious about filling her tank, and she uses it sparingly so that she can afford to go to work and pay the bills on her home. However, if it wasn't for the food bank, she would not be able to eat because of the cost of the carbon tax, because of the cost of high taxes. She's just no further ahead. So I'm really advocating that we need to understand what this government is doing by creating this carbon tax on seniors, because it's absolutely ridiculous that a senior who's worked her whole life has to go through this motion just to support herself in a very modest way. Would you say, or would your experiences, have you heard any of the seniors complaining about how expensive it is with the carbon tax, the taxes, all of that, and that they're still working and using food banks? I mean, that's absolutely shameful.
Time has gone by. Mr. Collins for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I'll bring us back to the subject at hand. You know, for all of us around the table, I think, you know, we're all committed to seniors. I know that for my entire time in office, for the many years that I've had the privilege to represent my constituents, services for seniors has been a top priority, whether it's at the local level. Certainly our former provincial reps can say the same, and of course at the federal level, seniors continue to be a priority for all levels of government. I wanted to first start with the age of retirement. You know, I watched with interest when I was a city councillor the former Harper government move to increase the age of retirement from 65 to 67. Sorry, and of course we repealed that. Our government did before my arrival. And I've watched with interest other governments around the world flirting with that age issue. And so you might recall last year in France, there was a massive protest as the French government considered increasing their age of retirement, much like the former Harper government did. I know the UK, I think, has it on the books right now in terms of increasing the age of retirement from 66 to 67, and that will take place in 2026. So I know Professor Sweetman has looked at the seniors issues in many different areas. And I'm wondering, Professor Sweetman, if you could advise in terms of where Canada stands with some of our international comparators as it relates to support for seniors and the age of retirement issue.
Well, thank you for the question. My sense is that Canada does reasonably well, as reflected in the numbers that I read at the beginning of my opening. The poverty rate for seniors in Canada is well below the national average. Canada's old age security system, the entire system, not just the things covered in the Act, have been extremely successful in helping seniors and reducing the poverty rate for seniors. Having said that, there are clearly some seniors who are in dire situations. And I guess my answer to the second part of the question, or the second part of the bill, is that we would be better served by a more targeted, focused policy that tried to help seniors in need rather than also helping high-income seniors. People like you and I don't need a little bit more money. I prefer, and I think you would prefer, some of that money to be redirected towards people who are in need. And the second half of the current act doesn't do that. And I think that's an issue that's being faced internationally as well, that all countries are dealing with this trade-off between having broad general programs that focus on all of, or a large percentage of society. In Canada, something like 95, 96% of people over age 65 receive OAS, versus a targeted program like GIS. And I think many countries, what they're turning towards is something like Canada, where you have a multi-stage program that focuses a lot of resources on people at the low end and some resources on people at the higher end, because you need political buy-in at the high end in order to support the entire program, in order to support the redistribution. And so I think what's happening internationally is many people are dealing with the struggles that we're dealing with aging populations, and they are dealing with that trade-off between a broad universal program, which is extremely expensive and taxes our fiscal capacity, versus a more focused program that helps people who are most in need. So in terms of the age at retirement, people are clearly healthier for longer. people are clearly living longer, and many countries are moving towards an increased age of retirement, recognizing that. And that's a decision that societies need to make about how much leisure, how much, in some sense, free time we want to offer seniors. Not require of seniors. They can keep on working if they want, obviously, but we offer it to seniors. And our society has been flip-flopping on that as an electorate. And I don't think we've settled the question yet. And we may end up doing something more like the UK in the future, or we may not.
Thanks, Professor Sweetman. I have about 2 minutes left. I want to take you to the range of options that you've talked about, the targeted approach, which I think is a theme that our government picked up on, right, with some of the changes we made to the Canada Child Benefit, with the targeted approach that we've taken to seniors through the pandemic. I know you've done a lot of studies on the impact of on seniors as it relates to COVID, and of course there's a whole range of social supports that we can provide to seniors. Housing is a great example. Seniors make up the vast majority of those people who sit on affordable housing wait lists across the country. And so along that, some of the evidence that you've provided in terms of a targeted approach, you mentioned pharmacare. And of course, we just released our dental benefit. We've had hundreds of thousands of seniors have already registered for that. And so I'm hoping you can just expand upon, instead of a blanket approach that provides benefits to some of Canada's most wealthy individuals, why it's important to look at issues like the dental benefit, pharmacare, housing supports for seniors. Can you expand upon why that targeted approach is important, and expand maybe in some of those other areas where we could provide additional support for low-income seniors?
So I think what you're saying is very much aligned with what I am, that we need a targeted approach, not necessarily in the Old Age Security Act. Some of those targets will be in, as you said, support for living, for accommodation, for housing, support for dental care, for health care. I think many seniors would prefer to have, rather than 10% increase in their OAS, a much improved access to emergency departments or to primary care. And so I think we need to think about how we spend our money. And when we're spending it on seniors in something like the Old Age Security Act, we need to think about whether we're taking a broad brush and giving it to high income and low income alike, or whether we want to focus some of that money, not necessarily all of it, but a great proportion of it, on low income seniors.
Thank you, Mr.
In that sense,
Sweetman. Thank you, Mr. Sweetman. Mr.
Thank you.
Collins, Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Madam Chabot for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for coming here today for this important discussion on this bill. I'd like to join various comments that have already been made, but basically with this bill, we want to have equitable treatment for all seniors. The OAS in Canada is a universal program with some conditions attached. And here we've decided to make a distinction for the first time, where there's a different treatment for people between 65 and 74 years of age compared to 75 years of age and plus. And the bill is now going to correct this unequal, unfair treatment based on age, which I think is a form of discrimination because it take account of the needs of people between 65 and 74 years of age. So I've got a question to put to Madame Tassie Goodman. Thank you for being here, and thank you also to Mr. Monette for being here. You are expressing your support for this bill, and in the past, when the Liberal government decided to increase the OAS, which was one of its commitments, but it just increased it for people above 75. As you said, every day you have members who come to you and talking about this unequal treatment for people between 65 and 74 years of age. But what are people saying to you, and what are their motivations, which mean that you are giving your support to this bill? As already said in the Parliamentary Committee, Madame Chabot, you will remember, FADOC often mentions this, that needs are there. Many women carry out volunteer work, and basically they're then deprived, and there's expenses that they incur. And I won't say any more than that for just now. I'm going to give the floor to Philippe, who will answer these questions, because these needs really do exist. Mr. Monette, thank you for that question. So for 65 to 74 years of age people have been coming to talk to us about this since this was implemented. They don't understand why they've been excluded from this 10% increase with the OS, because there's financial precarity for people below 75 years of age. People have to leave the labour market, or perhaps they're laid off because there's age discrimination in the labour market. Sometimes they're forced to stop because they're not able to go to work. And as Mr. Gennaro said, there's lots of caregivers. They have to stop working to look after someone close to them, and that has an impact on whether they can actually contribute to a universal pension fund or a private pension fund. So there's lots of different issues at stake, and it's difficult to understand that 65 to 74 years of age are getting an OS revenue that's below the poverty threshold that's being set by the government itself. So if we increased it at least by 10% for this age range, at least they could actually reach the lower part of the market-based measures. It's basic needs. You can survive on it. It doesn't deal with medical care and ear and eye care. There's lots of different expenditure which is not even considered in this market-based measure approach, but that would be a strict minimum that we'd be giving them with this increase. Now, for concerns amongst seniors, I have gone to visit care homes to listen to seniors and their needs, and many of them said that they are very concerned about the cost of living, the question of housing as well. And we too had concerns about the OAS and also the Guaranteed Income Supplement and the government's commitments on these programmes. So amongst the members of the FADOC, you've got 550,000 members. Do you have a figure as to how many people only receive the OAS as their only form of revenue? Well, we've certain suppositions as around half of the people who live alone, who live with less than $26,000 per year. So they're living off the OS and the GIS. So there's a great deal of financial precarity amongst seniors, in particular people who live alone. There's lots of women, lots of widows. It's a real issue for them. So according to the low-income measurement, there's over 23% of seniors in Quebec that find themselves in a situation of poverty. And in this study, it was interesting to see that it was less than for the population under 65. But there's no distinction made between 65 and 74-year-olds and then the 75-year-olds and above. But as you've said, where the distinction is made is when we're looking at women compared to men. Women are more impacted by this percentage of 17%. So there needs to be this principle of equity, fairness in terms of the OAS benefits.
For 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses that have come today. And I really appreciate the gender lens that's been put on some of this in the discussion today about gender. And we know that women are punished for caring for family earlier on in their careers, and also the wage gap. So I really appreciate the light shined on that, and also the fact that seniors are still working in paid and unpaid work, and certainly on care, lots of unpaid care that's done by seniors. So this is an opportunity, as this comes to committee, to talk about amendments that could potentially come into this bill. So I'm interested, and I guess I'll ask Mr. Gennaro first, if there was an opportunity to to amend this bill to include something else that is important at this time. Is there anything that you would propose? And I also want to know your thoughts on this. The NDP, we've been asking for some grace period. A lot of times seniors don't get their income tax filed on time. They can lose their entitlements because they didn't get their income tax. And I think this might be an opportunity as we open 319 to make sure that we also give seniors some grace period. They've become sick, they're caring for a loved one, the income tax fall to the wayside, and they lose their entitlements. It seems unfair. Mr. Gennaro, if you wouldn't mind, your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zarella, for the question. Yes, certainly, there's a very good opportunity to look at some amendments here. On your point about tax filing, by way of a slight anecdote, my grandmother's accountant retired last year, and now we're scrambling to find somebody who she knows and trusts and speaks Portuguese, etc. Odds are her taxes will be late this year. Now, she is fortunate. She has people like me and many others around her who support her to do this work. So any sort of consideration of the fact that seniors often lead difficult lives, right? Their worlds are getting smaller and smaller. And I don't mean to paint with a general brush, but to make a point here, worlds get smaller. They need more and more support. The caregivers around them often have a lot on their plates as well. So anything that can be done to make these senior interactions with institutions, like tax filing for CPP purposes, like interactions with telecoms, for example, interactions with airlines, etc. Anything we can do to make that friction between seniors and these large institutions would be a good thing to consider, including in the context of the CPP. Around specific amendments, perhaps to this piece of legislation, I think it'd be very interesting to park in here an idea that perhaps it's time to help seniors who reach old age and start receiving CPP, but have had to opt out of the labor market for a long period of time, often women, as I noted in my comments, because of their care responsibilities, be it for children or others in their lives. In other countries, the state pays their state pension contributions while they're off caring for others. We see this in the UK. We see this all over Europe. Perhaps it's time to consider that here as an indirect way of supporting those seniors who are caregivers earlier in life, potentially become caregivers later on in life, but making sure that they're not punished for having cared for others when they were younger, when they could otherwise have been working. Because for people who have been in that choice between, in that situation where you're choosing between working full time and caring for a loved one, most of us, I think, would choose caring for a loved one. That's what we do for our families.
Thank you so much. And Monsieur Projet-Monette, I wonder if I could ask you the same question.
Oui, il y a beaucoup de choses.
Yes. Ms. Goodman mentioned many aspects in her opening remarks. There are certain elements that could be included in the bill. For example, when it comes to the indexation method for the OAS pension, as we said, the OAS is based on the Consumer Price Index, but there's a wage growth by another 1 point at least. So we need to keep it simple, and at the moment the OAS replaces around 15% of the average salary, but because of the indexation method, the replacement rate will actually go down for the OAS over time. So what's actually given by OAS will represent a lower percentage of the average wage in 15 or 20 years' time from now. That's a problem because it's the first pillar of retirement, it's the universal system, and then afterwards, of course, there's these various individual pension funds that come into play as well. It is the basis, so it needs to be put on a firm foundation before we come on to the CPP and so on.
Into the translation. Thank you so much for that. I also wanted to go back to Mr. Gennaro, just around some of the data that they've gathered and published. The data that you spoke about today, I'm wondering if there is a gender split on that. Was the data collected on a gender split? The reason I'm asking is the disproportionate amount of women that are doing that hardship?
Absolutely. Yes. Short answer is yes. Both the National Institute on Aging data that I referred to, as well as our own Canadian Caregiving Survey, both collected along gender lines, and the gender splits are there. I won't comment on the NIA data, the National Institute on Aging. It's widely available and happy to share with your office as well. Just released excellent work. On our own data around caregivers, not surprisingly, what we see just generally across the board is that men and women are 50-50 just as likely as not to be caregivers. Men and women, approximately 50-50 split, but women are, by orders of magnitude, more likely to be a caregiver for longer, take on more care responsibilities, or do it more often over the course of their lives. This is where that issue about CPP contributions becomes quite germane, because if you're in and out of the labor market, that becomes a problem. Similarly, in the EI system, if you're in and out of the labor market because of your care responsibilities, that becomes a problem as well. So the shorter, slightly longer answer to your question is that the gender breakdown of the caregiving data shows all of the issues I illuminated, but to a greater degree, frankly, for women.
Ms. Falk? Ms. Falk for 5 minutes, or? That's what I had. Ms. Ferrari? Okay. Ms. Ferrari for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses here as we study Bill C-319, an act to amend the Old Age Security Act. If I can start with you, Mr. Gennaro. Can I call you James? Okay. Great to see you again. I think what we're hearing here today is obviously seniors are in dire straits. Anybody who basically, there's so many people in dire straits. Our seniors seem to be, more on the vulnerable end of that position. And your testimony today about there are primarily caregivers, and I think a lot of us here who have aging parents know and are watching that. And it hit home. I saw a lot of nods as you were giving your testimony. And this increase is saying to increase. This bill is saying to increase old age from $5,000 to $6,500 a year, which seems so minimal. I'm going to be honest with you, in a cost of living crisis, which you touched on. When have you ever seen inflation or a cost of living crisis be this bad in your time of working in this industry?
Well, I'm 36 years old. I've never seen this in my life. To be completely honest with you, I think we're all living that across the world, frankly, seeing what inflation is doing to retirement incomes and other more fixed incomes as well. I'll also say when I was in school doing my master's about 10 years ago, seniors' poverty was sort of taught as a victory, that we had figured this out. Canada, as one of the speakers alluded to, and Mr. Collins also pointed out in his remarks, our senior poverty rate in Canada up until fairly recently was low and going lower, and we were a leader in the world in that regard. Unfortunately, I can share some of this data with your office. Even just looking at one particular town in Ontario, Hamilton, Ontario, there's some recent study done there where poverty rates across the board have trickled either down a little bit or stayed flat, but among seniors, they've started to go up. So what had been a victory not long ago, that scourge of senior poverty seems to be surfacing for us again, and cost of living is frankly a large part of it. If you're living on a fixed income and your grocery bill is orders of magnitude larger this month than it was a year ago, you're going to feel that in your fixed income.
Yeah, if you want to table that to the committee, I think it would be useful for the report. I think what I'm trying to say here is, yes, this is an important bill, but it feels like you're on a hamster wheel, because you're going to pay out more money. It's going to cost more money. You're going to have to make up that money. But if you didn't have the cost of living already exponentially out of control, you wouldn't have these kinds of problems. And to my colleague Ms. Roberts' point earlier about the carbon tax, which is one of the things we're seeing driving up the cost of food in particular, and seniors dealing with these soaring heating costs when they're on a fixed income. And especially the caregivers, they're under so much stress. This isn't drama, this is reality, and the pain is very, very real. The human consequences of inflation is very real. Where do you see carbon tax fitting into this stress?
So your analogy about the hamster wheel is a pertinent one. In our survey that I referenced earlier, we asked caregivers to throw in a few words unprompted about their experience, and the word hamster wheel came up quite often, frankly. because it just feels like you're spinning. You're always Googling at 3 a.m. to see what's the next thing you can qualify for to make your life or the person you cared for's life a little bit easier. And frankly, you often come up with very little from that search. So it is a hamster wheel for far too many. I'm not going to comment specifically on the carbon tax because I don't know, frankly. I don't know the ratio between carbon tax in one end, seniors' income and caregiver income out the other. But what I can tell you is that I think we all have a collective responsibility, and our elected officials have a collective responsibility to do what we can to bring down that cost of living for everybody. Everybody living on a fixed income, be it a senior or others, feels this in an acute way. Right? If you're in a position where you're renegotiating your salary at the end of a work year or something like that, you've got some movement. But if your income is fixed, you don't have that luxury.
Thank you. And I just want to read into the record, I got this message from a constituent of mine. Sorry to send my crying heart to you, but need to get this off my chest. I live in Peterborough all my life, work at General Motors for 35 years, sent my daughter to university to become a lawyer, paid off my house, and now live And now, with my pension, I can't afford to live with these prices. When I pay all my bills, start month, it leaves me $2 to spend. I'm 65 years old, and am now looking for a job to support myself before I lose my house. Just hope an election is soon so we can turn things around. These are the messages that we're getting, and I think when you waste taxpayers' money, this is what happens in terms of cost of inflation. And I really do thank you for what you do, because the caregivers are not okay right now, and they desperately need you. So thank you for being their voice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fragascatos for 5 minutes.
Cost of living challenges affect all of us as MPs because they affect our constituents, but that's true of every democracy, Mr. Chair, and I think it's important that we discuss these issues and face them head on, as other parliamentarians are doing, as I say, in various democracies. To Mr. Sweetman, first of all, thank you for appearing today. I was quite interested in the point that you raised on opportunity cost. Could you summarize that again, sir, and talk about the implications of this bill from an opportunity cost frame?
My basic idea is that right now the federal government has limited fiscal capacity. I think before COVID, it had a lot more flexibility, but during the COVID regime, government deficits have increased substantially. And if governments are going to be spending large amounts of money, we need to be thinking about where they spend it, because they have limited amounts of opportunities to spend large amount of money. They can either spend it on pharmacare or a limited number of other programs, and they have to make choices. My fear is that we're going to end up like we were in the 1990s. And I think seniors will remember the 1990s when we got ourselves in such a bad situation in terms of public deficits that we ended up cutting back healthcare quite a lot. And I don't want to return to those days where we can't afford to fund healthcare because we've spent our money, our public money, unwisely. So we need to think about the choices we have to make, hard choices we have to make. And the point I was making earlier is it's true that many low-income seniors are in straitened circumstances. Some are facing quite difficult challenges, but seniors are also among the wealthiest, highest income people in our society. And a broad brush approach that gives money to the wealthiest in our society as well as the low income in our society is probably not a good use of funds right now. If it was pre-pandemic and the government financial books were in a bit better state than they are now, then I would say, yes, we can afford to do it. But right now, it's not clear that we can. And so we need to think about our priorities. Would we prefer to have better access to primary care and emergency rooms? Would we prefer to have pharmacare? Would we prefer to have dental care? Or would we prefer to have a 10% increase in OAS for people between 65 and 75? Incidentally, my reading of the numbers shows that poverty rates are much higher for people just before they turn 65. So in their late 50s and early 60s, they sort of hit a low in the early 60s, and then they start to increase so that by age 75, 85, 90, they're much higher than they were at 65 to 75. And almost all of that increase, incidentally, is among females. For males over age 65, the poverty rate is roughly flat, or I should say the low income rate is roughly flat as a function of age. But for women, it's increasing in age. And so it really is the women over age 75, or it's hard to draw an exact cutoff, but at some more senior age than 65 to 70, who are among seniors experiencing higher poverty rates. But having said that, people just short of 65 have higher poverty rates than even those who are at 75 to 80. So I think we do need to think very carefully about how we're spending our money, and especially in these days where we have limited amounts of money in our kitty, as it were.
Thank you, Professor Sweetman. You mentioned the 1990s and deficits, conservative government responsible for those deficits, but I do not want to dwell on that. What I do want to ask you is about conservative policy now. You will be familiar, because you study these sorts of issues, with pay-as-you-go legislation first popularized in the United States. Mr. Poilievre has proposed doing the same thing with respect to federal spending as a control for federal spending. This implies, I think, a lot, to say the least, for seniors in this country. And I think of it in these terms. Since CPP, the GIS, and OAS are, of course, indexed to inflation, from that comes a view that the increases that result because of the index to inflation could count as new spending, necessitating cuts in other areas, according to the formula of pay-as-you-go. So from that, one could say that we could see cuts in other areas, like the New Horizons for Seniors program, which we know has proved tremendously important in helping seniors in a variety of ways. Do you have concerns about Mr. Poilievre's pay-as-you-go framework for federal spending in the future, should he be elected as Prime Minister?
I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. To a certain extent, all government programs are to some degree pay-as-you-go, and with the deficit and annual debts a way of transferring some proportion of federal spending across years. Seniors care a lot about their children and grandchildren and are concerned about leaving substantial debts to their children and grandchildren, especially when that debt is mostly funding consumption rather than investment. So I think when we're thinking about pay-as-you-go, I think we want to be very careful about whether we're paying for current consumption or whether we're paying for an investment for future generations.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Chabot, pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
2.5 minutes, Madame Chabot. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the opposition party for having allowed of the adoption of Bill C-319 in the House, which allows us to study something that's fundamental, which I don't always hear about in discussions between the two parties. Namely, what is the impact on an OAS, a fixed income for 65 to 74-year-olds? What's been the impact of the fact that there's been no increase for this age group? Mr. Monnet. Well, these are difficult daily choices then that have to be made as a result of this. You put something back in the grocery store or not, buy all of the medication that you need for your health, or as I said beforehand, seniors have certain expenses, for example, for glasses or for hearing aid, dental care that they can't avoid. There's this dental care program coming out, but it's not very clear yet. We're waiting for more clarification there. So these expenses can come to more than $1,100 per year. So people are depriving themselves of these things. It has an impact on their health and their autonomy. And of course, there are societal costs attached to all of that. So that needs to be borne in mind. Now, you've already mentioned financial precarity. It's ageless. And you've just illustrated that. We talk a great deal about the cost of living, but it's very important to think about people on a fixed income. That's one of your concerns. Do you have other solutions? You've talked about increasing the GIS. You've referred to the indexation method, but it seems that over and above the two measures being proposed, are there other things that you'd like to add? The proposal to increase the gains exemption ceiling is a very good thing. The preceding government did that, and each time we've welcomed that because the GIS, from a tax point of view, it is a tax trap. It's a poverty trap. So people, they get this 50 cents clawback after a certain amount, so it penalises them at work and it doesn't allow them to get out of poverty. So increasing the ceiling is, of course, a good, necessary measure. And then there's question of a tax credit for experienced workers. And as Ms. Goodman said, if we increase the gains exemption ceiling, that will be a step in the right direction, in particular in this context where we've got difficulties with cost of living and also with the labour shortage. Thank you very much, Madame Chabot. And now, Madame Zerillo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I actually have a motion today because I note that both Madame Goodman and also Mr. Gennaro talked about the caregiver tax credit. So I wanted to read a motion, which is, I move that the committee write to Minister Freeland to highlight her mandate to convert the Canada caregiver credit to a refundable tax-free benefit and ask that it be part of the upcoming spring budget so that Canadians who care for their loved ones are also looked after. And I know we've heard a lot of talk today about the financial stress of caregivers and how much pressure is on caregivers. So I'm hoping that we won't need a vote and that we can just advance this letter writing to the minister.
Madame Zerillo, we do not, no. Received the required notice for a demotion. If you want to do it in both official languages, we can debate it at that time. You did not provide the committee with notice that I'm aware of. And these are the rules the committee adopted.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I just wanted to close out on housing, because we are really seeing a disproportionate amount of seniors losing their housing and rent getting out of control. So I wonder if I could just ask, probably only have about less than a minute each, Mr. Monet, if you wouldn't mind just sharing what you've seen around housing costs for seniors and the impacts, and Mr. Gennaro, if you could just finish on that.
Thank you for that question. Each week in Quebec, we see cases of people who are living in private seniors' residences where the rents are really exponentially increasing. Each service it costs an arm and a leg. It's very costly. And the trouble is that these senior private residences have got a big share, the lion's share of the market. So in FEDOC, we want there to be healthy diversity when it comes to collective living areas. It could be non-profit residences and not just in the private sector. That's what we're suggesting, so that average people are able to go to these residence homes. There's also the public sector and cooperatives and not-for-profits in the sector, and that really help people who don't have the necessary revenue to pay for the more expensive ones.
As Canadians, we're unique in the industrialized world where the housing bill is the first bill we pay, right? Like we don't get behind on mortgage or rent and things like that typically if we can avoid it. So unfortunately, the impact is everything else suffers. The grocery bill suffers, buying medication suffers, and that sort of thing. And if you're a caregiver, on average, you're about $5,000 to $6,000 a year out of pocket already because of your care responsibilities. So if you stack increasing housing costs on top of probably your second bill that you pay the most, supporting the person you love, everything else gets pinched all that much more.
Madame Zerillo, we got about 15 seconds
Well,
left.
then I'm going to ask if the committee would be open to sending a letter to the minister to ask that the minister fulfill the part of her mandate letter, which asks for the Canada caregiver credit to be a refundable tax-free benefit. I would ask for the committee to agree with sending a letter.
We are now out of time. The committee's time, we started at 8:15. What is the wish of the committee? Is the wish of the committee to extend or to adjourn? I don't see any consensus. Madame Zerlo, you can raise that obviously at the next meeting. With that, thank you for the witness and members. The committee is adjourned.